It's the MyMichelleLive podcast.
MyMichelleLive, Sci Tech Talk, taking the God story to a geeky place. Here's Michelle.
Thank you, big voice guy. Well, here we are getting ready to take on another Sci Tech Talk. And this one is dedicated to you folks in Texas who have been dealing with, okay, we know, let's just say Texans, you are a hardy people. But one thing it seems like you can't handle is snow. And we look at what's going on around us and say, wow, the world is going crazy. The climate's going crazy. And that's why we're talking climate control today. Finding truth and answers in a politically charged environment. How do we do that? I mean, we've evolved from these phrases. Think about this. Global warming to climate change to now climate crisis. So we're going to talk about that logically. We're going to get away from the hyperbole and go right to some of the issues and find some logical answers and plant them in our brains and try to be part of the solution. Tom Harris is with us. He's the executive director of the Ottawa, Canada. It's based in Ottawa, Canada, and that's the International Climate Science Coalition. Tom, thanks for making time for me this morning.
Yeah, it's good to be on.
Looking at Texas going crazy, we look at the world and it's hard to deny that there's climate change. But what we're not really allowed to talk about is some of the solutions. We only hear one side. And so we want to look at that from kind of a ground zero basis, not on the left, not on the right, but just really looking, combing through science and finding solutions. And Tom, we've run the gamut of theories on what's happening with the climate, from the government is controlling the weather to control us, to man is a cancer on the earth, so we need to recede to caves and start gnawing on grass and plant-based nirvana. So, so here we are. Help us make some sense of this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, climate always changes. In fact, if it weren't the case that it was changing, where I am in Ottawa, Canada, we'd still be under 2 kilometers of ice because, of course, 25,000 years ago, we were stuck in the middle of a glacial period. So climate changes. And in fact, since about 1880, temperatures risen about, on average, 1 degree Celsius across the world. And that's been a good thing because we were in the Little Ice Age when storms were much worse and the Thames River in London, for example, froze a meter thick. It never freezes now, except just last week it froze for the first time slightly. But so climate always changes. So what we need to do is we need to adapt to climate change and prepare for it. And that's indeed what the United Nations originally wanted back in 2009 in Copenhagen. I went to the Copenhagen Climate Conference, and they wanted to have half of the money spent on trying to adapt to climate change. But that's not what has happened. Over $1 billion a day is being spent around the world on climate finance. And unfortunately, 95% of it is going to trying to stop climate change, going to mitigation, that's what they call it. And only 5% goes to helping real people today adapt to climate change. And we think that's a real travesty. I mean, the bottom line is you're actually allowing people to suffer in the present due to natural climate change more than people, in fact, in the future who might be inconvenienced by it. So there's something wrong going on here.
Well, yeah, if we don't have this conversation, we don't find all of the solutions. Now, I'm assuming that you're not saying that, we have emissions and we have waste and we have reliance on plastics that we throw away and electronics that have built-in obsolescence. I mean, those aren't good things for the environment. You're not saying that
right.
that they're not destructive things that we're doing. You're saying that if we don't look at some of the natural causes as well, we're not getting the whole picture, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And, it's interesting because in many ways, the climate scare is really damaging environmentalism because environmentalism has a very important role to play. We should reduce pollution. We should save energy. We should look after species at risk and things like that. But the trouble is, you see, the climate scare has virtually overrun the environmental movement. When they have Earth Day now or Earth Hour, it's almost all entirely focused on climate change most years. And that's a big problem because in reality, we're not causing dangerous climate change. In fact, you can see that very clearly in the record. But there are real environmental problems. So I think that what's going to happen is when the climate scare is eventually shown to be wrong, because I'm certainly sure it will be, the whole environmental movement will be discredited. And that's really a shame because the environmental movement is very important when it focuses on important and real issues.
And then we're just back to where we are right now, ignoring one whole side of an argument and only getting part of the picture. So we really have got to be to a point where we realize we need each other. We need the give and take. And excuse me for going all Sunday school for a moment, but I remember a Bible verse from when I was a kid: as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And it's talking about sharpening, getting sharp, not about using those irons to impale each other. We kind of need that. And sometimes there's a clash. When you're sharpening iron, there's sparks might fly, but you're becoming honed and better. I think that we're getting away from that. Can we use an example? The Keystone Pipeline. The Keystone Pipeline, of course, a lot of people have concerns about the environment, as well they should. But if we completely say we don't want this in North America, we surrender our right and our ability to keep an eagle eyes watch on what's going on environmentally, because Saudi Arabia and a lot of the countries in the Middle East are not going to say, yeah, come on in, make sure we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, exactly. And pipelines, of course, are the least environmentally damaging way to transport oil. There's no way that we're going to go off oil very, very quickly. 80% of America's electricity comes from fossil fuels. And in fact, 80% of the electricity around the world comes from fossil fuels. And, you know, one thing people don't realize, I think Joe Biden may not have read the Paris Agreement, because right on page 1 of the agreement, they reference something called the Convention. And what they're talking about is the Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is the treaty that was signed in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, and it's the foundation of all UN climate agreements, including the Paris Agreement, as well as the Kyoto Protocol and others. And this Framework Convention, it was signed by George Bush I. What it says is that developing nations, and they considered China a developing nation in 1992, but they still consider them a developing nation. So they said that developing nations, their first and overriding priority is poverty alleviation and development, not greenhouse gas emission reduction. So if you think about it, what's going to happen in 2030 when, according to the Paris Agreement, the Chinese have to stop increasing emissions? What will happen is they will continue to build coal stations, coal-fired power plants. And what they'll say when people object, they'll say, oh, you're supposed to cap emissions. They'll say, no, we have an out clause in the Framework Convention on which Paris is based. We actually have our first and overriding priority is poverty alleviation and development. And the only way we can alleviate poverty and develop is to continue our cheapest form of power, which is coal. So since China is right now putting out twice as much emissions as the United States, and they clearly have no particular reason to restrict it, you know, it's interesting that, you know, they actually confronted the Chinese negotiator at the the Peru conference in 2014, and they asked if he would change the out clause that China has in the Framework Convention. And they said, no, the purpose of the Paris Agreement is to enforce the Framework Convention, not to change it. So if you did think that we were causing dangerous climate change by our greenhouse gas emissions, then the Paris Agreement is not going to pull back on the most significant emitter and other developing nations. So it's completely a waste of time for the United States by itself to try to lead the world when the world's not going to follow.
Right. So we are once again in a place where we need to have a dialogue. We need all of the sides to be able to converse, but we're not seeing that. We're greatly out of balance. It's not a surprise. And you bring up the administration. We have a new administration, some environmental challenges that we are dealing with, but the same old debate on climate change. So I wanted to talk about a fact sheet that the White House put out. It said it's called President Biden Takes Executive Actions to Tackle the climate crisis at home and abroad, create jobs, restore scientific integrity across the federal government. Have you read that document?
Oh, yeah. In fact, we've written a three-part series for America Out Loud, showing, in fact, that there's a lot of mistakes, unfortunately, in the document. And, I should make it clear that I don't think that Biden and the other people are purposely trying to mislead the public. I think the public and the people like President Biden have been misled by mainstream media and the activists. And sadly, they actually think that, first of all, carbon dioxide is carbon pollution, because in that document, his executive order, they're actually calling carbon dioxide carbon pollution many times throughout the document. And if
Wait,
you think
that's
about
what
it,
we breathe
really
out. That's like, okay,
Yeah.
if you really love the environment, you can breathe in all you want. Just don't breathe out. There we go.
That's right.
I'm
Well,
doing my part.
That's right. That's right.
Holding
And
my
carbon
breath.
dioxide, well, carbon dioxide is an invisible, odorless, colorless gas. I mean, it's not carbon. Carbon is solid. It's soot, or it's graphite. Those things are carbon. Carbon dioxide is one of the most important gases on the earth. And people say, "Oh my goodness, there's been a 40% rise since 1880." But 40% is nothing in the world when you look at what nature has done. I mean, we have had carbon dioxide levels as high as 1,300% of today's level millions of years ago. And so you go back in time, Michelle, and you say, well, what did the Earth do in the real world? Did it get hot? Did it get cold? What happened when CO2 was much, much higher than today? Well, what you find is that it's all over the map. 440 million years ago, it was the coldest period in the last 500 million years. And carbon dioxide was at least 10 times higher, 1,000% of today's level. And so you say, well, yeah, but if CO2 didn't drive climate in the past, if it didn't make it warmer, because sometimes it's warmer, sometimes it's colder, sometimes there's no change when you see CO2 rising or lowering, you have to say, well, then what is driving climate change? And it seems almost certain that it's the sun. The sun goes through various cycles, and of course we have no control over the sun. And one thing that's quite worrisome, Michelle, is the astronomers at the Pulkovo Observatory near St. Petersburg in Russia. They study the sun. They look at all of its cycles. And every once in a while, they have what's called a grand solar minimum. And this is when all the cycles hit rock bottom at exactly the same time. And what has happened throughout history is when that's happened, last time was a couple hundred years ago, we found that it was very cold on the Earth. The next time that's happening is around 2060. And so the Russians, believe it or not, are saying that we're headed for very serious sun-induced global cooling. And I think this really illustrates how immature the field really is. I mean, if you have some scientists saying, oh, we're headed for dangerous global warming, others saying dangerous global cooling, well, obviously the science is all over the map. And so I always laugh when I hear Al Gore say the science is settled. And I say, well, what planet are you from?
that is one of my pet peeves, that phrase, settled science. Just one moment, I just want to address you as you're listening today. Science, by its very nature, is never settled. It must be poked. It must be prodded. It must be challenged. And that's how new discoveries come about. Once we say science is settled, we might as well just make camp and start a new dark age. Sorry, Tom. Had to say that. All right. Got that off my chest. I feel better now.
Yeah. And, the whole concept that, Al Gore's film was called An Inconvenient Truth and Truth to Power, and his second one. And, the whole concept of truth, it doesn't even apply in science. I took a course quite a while ago by Professor Goldman from Lehigh University near Chicago. He was doing a great courses course. And he maintains, and it's interesting because I think he's right. He says that science is not about truth. Science is seeking truth, but science is really just the opinions of the researchers based on their interpretation of the observations. And that's a very subjective thing. I mean, different people interpret the same data quite differently. And of course, in many cases, they have different data. So you're quite right. Science is never settled. There's never truth. We search for truth. We get better and better theories, and over time, we come to eventually call them theories. But we have to remember that even Newton, I mean, Newton was considered some sort of almost a demagogue in the scientific community. He had broken through a barrier. He had discovered truth about nature. And, you know, when Einstein showed that much of what Newton had said in some aspects were not true, Einstein was actually a real fan of Newton's, and he had a picture of Newton on the wall in his office in Princeton. I went to his office. It was pretty cool to see it. He said, "Forgive me, Sir Isaac," because, of course, Newton didn't know the truth either. And that's the case about science. As long as we understand that we're simply humans who interpret data, we can make mistakes, we can change our mind. We're trying to find truth, but there is no truth in science. So yeah, let's open the doors. Let's welcome in alternative points of view, and we can test out the theories and see who's right. And you know, Michelle, I just point out one quick thing. The whole global warming scare, so to speak, is based on computer model forecasts of the future. Okay, it's not based on what's actually happening now, because the records were set actually a long time ago. We were talking off air just before. The record highest temperature in Washington State, for example, there were 2 years that tied. In the summer of 1961 and the summer of 1928 was your maximum temperature of 118 degrees.
Ooh.
And you see that all, yeah.
Wow, it doesn't get that hot very often here, obviously. Woo!
Yeah, but you look through the records for Washington, for example, minimum temperature 1968, greatest snow depth 1956. So what you find is that the records are not being set in recent years, and you see this all across all 50 states in the Union. Most of the records were set in the 1930s. And similarly, with a 1 degree temperature rise, I mean, that's not a climate emergency. That's not a crisis. Sea levels rising about 7 inches per century, as it has for many centuries. There's now 3 times as many polar bears in the Arctic as there was in the 1960s. So, you know, the data just does not back up the climate scare. It's all based on computer model forecasts of the future that so far have not worked. When we go back 30 years and we look and see what they forecast, they're saying 3 times the temperature rise should have occurred than actually did occur. So indeed, you know, we should keep a very open mind about the science because it's clearly not settled.
All right. So we have, it would seem, a planet that is in flux. It changes. And we've seen that in the scientific models, looking back as far as we've had records and as far as we can extrapolate from the evidence. Our planet, Tom, has been in flux. The climate changes. It gets warmer. It gets cooler. It may actually be part of the system programming, if I could say, of our planet that keeps us habitable for the life that we have on our planet. I think that's important to note. However, there is, and I know that you've done talks on this, there's a balance between being smart about our environmental challenges, being smart about our use of things to take care, to be caretakers, if you will, of our environment, and to help people adapt and maybe even initiate good science and good discoveries to offset some of the negative effects of climate change, be it natural or be it man-made.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And you know, there are ways to prepare for climate change. And I'll give you an interesting example. Along the coast of the Gulf Coast of America. When they have a hurricane approaching, people jump in their cars and they drive like crazy to try and get out of the region. But you know, in India, along the coast of the Bay of Bengal, what you have is vertical evacuation storm shelters. These are huge concrete block storm shelters built on massive stilts that take people 2 and 3 stories above the storm. And so since they're spaced every kilometer along the coast, the farthest you have to walk is about a half a kilometer, and then you go up a couple of stories and you're above the storm and you just wait. And that's preparation. That's adaptation to climate change. That's adaptation, in this case, to extreme weather. And that's the kind of thing that is worth doing. Similarly, in New York City, there were parts of Manhattan that never lost electricity or cable or any interconnection because their cables were buried underground during Hurricane Sandy. So there are things we can do to make our infrastructure hardened to get ready for climate change and extreme weather, but I don't think we can stop it. I mean, it's going to happen whether we like it or not.
We're going to be continuing the debate on climate change and some of the problems with auto emissions, for example, and the effects of our choices, our technology on the environment, whether it's causing climate change or whether it could just be bad choices for a good planet. We're going to continue that debate, as we absolutely should, without canceling each other, please, for years to come. But one thing that is, I think, important is continuing to improve on the science of clean energy, to improve on maybe wind and solar and the like. But often I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, what I often see, though, is that we've just got, cars are evil. We've just got to get rid of all cars instantly and utilize the green energy that we have that right now is expensive. So I almost see it like I see medicine. We have a dependency on pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals can do wonderful things, but they're not really good for us long term. Natural medicine is astounding, but sometimes we need those pharmaceuticals to save our lives. And so if we can find a natural remedy, sometimes we need to wean ourselves off of the pharmaceuticals. I see that as an analogy, if you will, for a need that we might have in the environmental realm. What say you?
Yeah, I think that it's very important to continue research into truly clean energy. You know, ultimately, the most clean form of energy will probably be fusion, controlled fusion, like in a hydrogen bomb, but actually controlling it so that we can actually get the electricity out. But the thing is about energy, there really is no free lunch, okay? It's one of the laws of the universe that entropy always increases. And what that means is that producing energy in any way produces pollution. So we have to be realistic about what pollution is being produced and try to minimize it. You know, for example, wind power looks on the surface like it's a very clean energy source, but you might have seen the movie Planet of the Humans by Michael Moore. What he does is he actually shows that in many cases, what we think is clean energy is not actually clean energy if you make it in the wrong way. For example, we need rare earths to make the supermagnets in the top of the huge wind turbines. And right now, the major source of rare earths is China, and they produce these elements under incredibly polluting conditions. And now, if we pull that industry back to North America and we do it under proper environmental control, that would be hugely better. But right now, China is the world's leader in wind and solar energy, and they really don't protect the environment well at all. And Michael Moore shows in a 3-minute part of that movie, Planet of the Humans, the real environmental impact. And we're not talking about all the bird kills. There's a huge amount of bird kills from wind turbines. And sadly, Michelle, bat kills are even twice as bad as bird kills. They're talking about some bat species being driven to extinction as a result of wind turbines. Now, I'm not saying that wind turbines don't have a role to play. They do. But like every other energy source, there are problems with all these energy sources. And so we have to be realistic and compare one against the other properly, because there's no free lunch. When it comes to energy, they all make some form of pollution or environmental degradation.
Oh, Tom, that is one of the most reasonable things I've heard in a long time concerning our environment and climate change, that there really is no free lunch. That helps us to bring it back to a reasonable conversation instead of these crazy, divided, and sometimes even extreme ideologies that disallow for any kind of dialogue. I am just so grateful for your time today, and I just wanted to turn over to you for our final moments, just thoughts, maybe words of encouragement, things that maybe we're not hearing from the mainstream media that you think that we need to know as we move forward as human beings.
Yeah, for sure. The climate scare has become actually one of the biggest industries in the world. There's over $1 billion a day being spent on it. And the sad thing is there are many real environmental concerns that we know need our help and need monies and things like that. I mean, water pollution, the oceans, plastics, everything you were mentioning, those are real issues. So what we need to do is we need to open our minds to the possibility that the climate scare has been hugely exaggerated to the extent that it's swamping all the other real environmental concerns. And I direct people to what's called Climate Change Reconsidered. This is a report put out by the Non-Governmental International Panel on Climate Change. People can check it out. It's climatechangereconsidered.org. And in there, they have thousands of scientific peer-reviewed references that show that the climate issue has been hugely exaggerated and that we really should be focusing more on environmental concerns that we know are significant and we know we control. And so, yeah, we got to open the debate and stop canceling each other. I mean, that's crazy. We should be opening it and trying to decide what's the best approach to protecting our environment.
And we started that conversation here, and I hope it continues. As you're listening, please like this, share this, copy the link, let people know. A reasonable discussion on climate change. How often do you hear that? Well, you will hear it a lot if you are in touch with the executive director of the International Climate Science Coalition, based there in Ottawa, Canada, our good neighbors to the north. Tom, this has been enlightening and so encouraging. I think I almost can use the word empowered. You feel so much more empowered instead of a kind of a doom and gloom. You've left us hopeful, and I really thank you for that.
Hey, that was fun. Thanks, Michelle.
Hey, man, you can go to our website and find out all you need to know about gorgeous beards, keeping your beard absolutely touchably soft. Go to MyMichelleLive and scroll down for realbeardedmen.com. So keep listening and hang on. There's more to come. We'll be joined in just a few moments by Dr. Hugh Ross with some of the most innovative ideas for our climate and our planet that you may have ever heard.
She may just be the friendliest voice you hear all day. Well, next to mine, of course. Making the leap from broadcast to podcast in a single bound, and all in her superhero pajamas.
Thanks, big voice guy. I am Michelle Mendoza. Hey, please go to MyMichelleLive.com. I have only a few things that I recommend that we put on our page because, well, I'm like that. If I don't love it, I'm not going to tell you about it, but I absolutely love Calitrin. It is a fountain of youth in the bottle. Seriously, as you grow older, your collagen levels drop, and Calitrin is the number one supplement for folks trying to lose weight in America, naturally, slowly. But for me, it wasn't weight. It was brain fog, nice, clear skin, hair, nails, energy levels, focus. That's what it's about for me. For many people, it's indigestion problems, heartburn, and even some of the effects of aches and pains in arthritis. Collagen does a lot. Calitrin does it all. I love it. So please go to MyMichelleLive.com. Also there, you can check out our other podcasts that you can listen to throughout the week. Welcome to SciTech Talk. We have a new administration and some environmental challenges and the same old debate on climate. So we're looking at climate change, the issues surrounding climate, and trying to look at it from a balanced approach, getting all of the information and trying to stay away from getting the entrapment of my way or the highway, cancel culture. There's only one way of thinking. There's settled science. Science, my friend, never settled. So, climate control on the table today, finding truth and answers in a politically charged environment. Not easy, but I'm telling you what, we are up for the challenge, and we're going to do it now with astrophysicist, Christian apologist, best-selling author, founder of Reasons to Believe, and of course, frequent flyer here on this program, Dr. Hugh Ross. A joy to talk with you again, Doctor.
Oh, thank you for inviting me back. Appreciate it.
You have written what I have touted to be the most balanced, non-political, let's just look at some options, what's really happening book on climate change that I've come across. It's called Weathering Climate Change, A Fresh Approach, and I'm holding it up for our live audience to see everywhere that we are podcasting this. Weathering Climate Change, Dr. Hugh Ross. I'm so thankful because I think in every regard we've gotten over politicized. So finding a fresh approach is good, Doctor. And we look at places like Texas that has what some have said unprecedented snowstorms, left them without power. We're saying, hey, there is a problem, but where are we engaged in damage control, climate change concern, and climate scare? Where do we find ourselves in the midst of that?
Well, we need to realize that we human beings are fundamentally selfish, which means if we're going to be able to take appropriate action, there needs to be an economic incentive. And that's why I loaded my book up with ways we can stabilize the climate, reduce global warming, while we boost the world economy rather than cripple the world economy. And if people see a strong economic incentive, we don't need the government to pass all these regulations and laws and try to restrict human behavior. Let the free market do its thing. I think the problem is a lot of our political leaders simply aren't aware that strong economic incentives are out there.
All right, that may be true, and we kind of we tend to, and we've seen this in some regard with the coronavirus, we have bureaucrats who have some scientific background and they become these gurus of all knowledge to the exclusion of all other ideas. Today, we've already touched a little bit on the issue of a changing climate that is actually part of our world history and not simply a man-made phenomenon. And you touch on that in Weathering Climate Change.
Well, I do. I make the point that the norm is climate instability. What we've been experiencing for the past 9,500 years is the exception, extreme climate stability. And that extreme climate stability, when it was first beginning to show up 9,500 years ago, enabled the launch of human civilization. Historians call it the Neolithic Revolution, when towns were first built, transportation systems were developed, and suddenly food production began to skyrocket. And the impact of all that is that human activity began to warm the world's climate at the same time natural cycles were cooling it. And for 9,500 years, the warming impact from human activity has been perfectly balanced by the natural cooling. And so we've had this amazing period of climate stability. And from a Christian perspective, I'm really overwhelmed in the sense that the Creator is fine-tuning the natural process, but also fine-tuning the human activity. And, where people, I think, have gotten alarmed, it took 8,700 years for the global mean temperature to decline by 1 degree centigrade. The bottom hit in 1950, but since 1950, the global mean temperature has gone up by 1 degree. So it took literally 8,700 years to decline by 1 degree, but only 70 years to increase by 1 degree. So we're at the same temperature now we were 8,700 years ago, which is no problem, but it would be a problem if the temperature were to rise by another degree or two.
Okay.
But I argue there are ways we can keep it at the present temperature while we boost the world economy, especially for the poor, while we actually enhance the world's ecosystems much better than they are right now. It's basically a win all the way around. The food supply is increased. People got more money in their pockets. The ecosystems benefit. Nature benefits. And so who would vote against it?
that transcends politics. You talk about a biblical worldview and the extraordinary history of the planet, that this very habitable, relatively stable climate came just as, and you may argue so, that man could flourish. I almost wonder as well if some of the changes that we're seeing, as you mentioned, we can possibly mitigate. It comes at a time when man may actually have the technology and the intellect to mitigate. So that doesn't seem like a coincidence either.
I don't think so, in the sense that, we actually have an energy source that's waiting to be exploited. That the politicians aren't talking about. And there I'm referring to thorium nuclear reactors. They're far safer than uranium thorium reactors. The only downside is you can't make weapons out of it. But today it's considered to be an upside.
Yeah, indeed. I wanted to go back just briefly to some of the science that we don't often hear about. And that has to do with the history of climate stability throughout world history. So as the fluctuation of climate warming, cooling, warming, what data do we have, first of all? And secondly, Hugh, what purpose does that play in the programming of our planet? I mean, was it programmed that way for a reason, I'm asking?
Yeah, good question. And I waited to bring the book out until we had really good temperature data for the past 10,000 years. And it was a scientific analysis of 74 different temperature proxies. And the bottom line was it revealed that the climate was 4 times more stable over the past 10,000 years than anyone previously had thought. I mean, people were looking at the Little Ice Age and, the Middle Ages warming period, and we now realize that those little blips are much smaller than what we thought. We have this amazingly stable climate, and it's in the midst of an ice age cycle. And I write in my book why we have to be living in an ice age cycle to be able to feed billions of human beings. We need the ice, the melting ice from the last ice age, to water the great agricultural plains. And living in an ice age, you get regular fertilization events. That's just 2 of 15 different benefits we get from living in an ice age. But if you look at the ice age we've been in for the past 2.6 million years, it's characterized by extreme climate instability. When you go by that shifting ice, it destabilizes the climate. The miracle of the past 10,000 years is that we are in an ice age cycle where for the first time we have climate stability in that cycle. And the only reason we have that is because of an extremely delicate balance between human warming activity and natural cooling. We should be deep in an ice age right now. The only reason we're not has been counterbalanced by human activity. And so that delicate balance over the past 10,000 years tells me there's a purpose for all this. And from my perspective, the purpose is God all along wanted to have billions of people living on the planet with sufficient technology and wealth that those billions could hear and respond to the gospel message, not in millions of years, but in only thousands of years.
That's extraordinary. So people have a place, and that kind of counters the idea that people are a cancer on the earth and that the only way to save the planet, as I stated a little bit earlier, is for us to recede into caves and gnaw on grass and not participate in any of the goings-on of the planet and let the planet just heal. So it would seem as though humans do have a purpose. However, we also know that according to your worldview, we're fallen people. So we do have a tendency to, break things. And many of our choices, some of our emissions, the reliance on things that are not recyclable, some of our waste, it just isn't good stewardship. But is it really having an effect on climate change?
Well, there's another biblical principle. We see in Genesis chapter 1 and Job 37, 38, and 39 that God has made us managers of planet Earth. We're to manage the Earth's resources for our benefit and the benefit of all other life, which tells me that God never intended humanity to be a cancer on the planet. He says, in advance, I've designed this planet in such a way you can manage it for both your benefit and the benefit of all other life, which means all we need to do as humans is look for those God-given solutions. And so what I write about in my book, while we're stabilizing the climate, we can enhance the ecosystems, actually make them better than how we found them in the beginning. I mean, that's, to me, is good stewardship. You not only maintain things, you actually improve things. And God has provided us with the means to actually make things a whole lot better for the rest of the plant and animal life here on planet Earth. And that would be more enjoyable for us humans.
Right.
Who doesn't like animals? Who doesn't like gorgeous plants?
This is true. I love that you are bringing it back to the point that it's almost as though when you go to visit someone, you want to leave things better than how you got it. That's how I was taught. If you're visiting, you leave it as nice or better than when you got it. We're visitors here. We've been given a beautiful opportunity to live on this extraordinary, miraculous planet. Maybe we can leave it a little bit better. We're going to get into some of the extraordinary solutions that you place in your book that transcend politics. Thank you very much. But something that I wanted to get to is if we omit some of the conversation. One thing that you even quoted this in your book, Al Gore's known for saying that differences in wealth distribution, political ideology, may be the biggest hurdles to overcoming and discerning and applying effective responses to climate change. But what we're seeing happening, as we alluded to a little bit earlier, is it's almost like we're saying, well, applying solutions that I like or that work best for me, follow the money, or fit my political ideology. What is it doing to the environment and to our climate by this continued logger-headed cancel culture, only letting part of the story be told? What is resulting from that, and how dangerous is that?
Well, readers of my book tell me it's the anti-Al Gore book, because Al Gore in his book was saying the rich people of the nations of the world need to make enormous economic sacrifices to set things right for the poor and for the climate. And my book is saying that's not necessary. And moreover, you're never going to sell that. Trying to convince people to cut their standard of living by a factor of 2 is a non-starter. What we need to do is find solutions where not only do the poor get a lot richer, but the richer get richer as well. So everybody will buy in. And that takes into account that people are fundamentally selfish. They have to have an economic incentive. And so, and that's where I think we can get the politics out, because the politicians had this idea. The only way we can rectify things is to pass these draconian laws to force our citizens to do what they don't want to do. Well, history should tell us whenever nations do that, whenever politicians do that, a black market develops. People will cheat. And so, again, we need to give the peoples of the world, the nations of the world, an economic incentive to do what's right. And I'm amazed at how many really good economic incentives are out there. Moreover, what I tell my political friends, I agree with you. This global warming that we're facing is a crisis. If we don't do something significant within the next decade, we're in deep trouble. But the only way you're going to get the peoples of the world to make rapid, significant action is to give them an economic incentive. I mean, if you tell people, look, if you do this, you're going to get a 15% return on your investment per year. You're not going to have to tell them to do it. They're going to call their investment director on the phone within the next hour and say, hey, I want this.
Yeah, it's important, too, because we look at some nations who have horrible standards of environmental impact, and they really have no incentive. So really, people who have a conscience will be the only ones participating, which puts them at an economic and power disadvantage, which in the end loosens our power to make change for the environment. If you follow me, it's like a decline.
I'll give you an example. Both India and China are gearing up to burn a whole lot more coal. And, of all the nations of the world that are experiencing the brunt of global warming, Canada is at the top of the list. They're warming about 5 times faster than the rest of the world. And the reason why is all that coal being burnt in China and India, the weather patterns basically deposit that black carbon soot on the snow in Canada. And, if you put black carbon soot on snow, it melts a lot easier. So that's really the explanation for why Canada is warming as fast as it is. But what if we were to go to nations like India and China and say, look, we have an energy source for you that's 10 times cheaper than coal. In fact, it's cheaper than any energy source out there. In fact, it's even cheaper than water power. And we're going to help you get this installed quickly. I mean, literally within 5 years, nobody would have to burn coal anymore.
All right, let's talk about that energy source. What is it, and how do we implement it?
Well, I only got a little hint of this in the book, but I've been giving talks on thorium nuclear power generation, how it delivers 300 times more energy than you get from uranium, and thorium is 3 times more abundant on the Earth. It's safe to mine, unlike uranium. It's impossible for your power station to have a meltdown. The workers in that power station don't have to wear protective gear. You say, what about the radioactive waste? Well, with uranium power generation, you got wastes that are toxic for 50,000 years. For thorium, it's only 200, and in many cases, those toxic wastes are safe to handle in just 50 years. And how about the energy you get? It would literally be cheaper than water power. There'd be no emissions of greenhouse gases. And there's enough thorium, for example, in the United States that it could power 100% of our energy needs for at least 1,000 years. And so, if you told people, look, we can reduce your energy bill down to 2% of what it is, I think everybody'd be happy.
Well, and except for the people who are making money otherwise, other ways, who will fight against it and say, hey, we don't want to use nuclear. It's not safe. But you've cited that we're looking at a whole new animal. I've been a critic of that kind of energy because I am concerned about the environment. But when you're looking at the fact that every single option, there really is no free lunch if you're going to produce energy. There's always something. Now, what can you do that has the least environmental impact, that has the most benefit, that costs the least? And foreseeably, many are arguing that this form of energy could be in places that energy normally wouldn't reach, and maybe change the economic impact on some of the most impoverished places in the world.
Well, it would, and you wouldn't have to carpet your deserts with solar panels, which would be a huge problem for the ecosystems out there. You wouldn't have to kill birds with windmills. You wouldn't have the problem of trying to sustain these things and have these long transmission lines. You could literally put thorium nuclear reactors anywhere in the world, and you would have short delivery systems. And I think the problem is that people have looked at uranium and said, wow, this is dangerous, it's bad for the environment.
Yeah.
I totally agree. But thorium is a completely different animal.
Interesting. And that's absolutely something we should be talking about, Googling, looking into. Science does improve and it challenges some of our widely held beliefs, like nuclear energy. And sometimes that's not comfortable, but if we're willing to have these conversations, we may come up with solutions. Another innovation that maybe transcends what our thoughts were is what you put in your book, Weathering Climate Change, about forests. You know, I've always grown up with the idea that old growth forests are one of the most important things on our planet. And certainly they're beautiful, and certainly, you know, there's no reason to clear cut the planet. But you say that there's more to the story that we really should be looking into.
Yes, I'm not a fan of clear-cutting lumbering. You actually make way more money on a forest by going into a forest and selecting out the big trees while they're still healthy. It's the big trees where you're going to make the most money. Selectively harvest those. Leave a few, because you need a few of the large trees to sustain the ecosystem. And then you replant those old trees with seedlings and young trees, because research shows that when a tree gets to be old, it doesn't grow very fast. And if you replace those slow-growing trees with trees that grow 4 times faster, that means they pull 4 times as much greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. And actually, you get lumber a lot faster if you got faster-growing trees.
Okay.
And it sustains the soil system. I mean, when you do clear-cutting, that does damage to the soil. But just going through and selectively harvesting, and don't let the old trees decay. When those old trees die and begin to decay, they release greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. Far better to harvest that old tree while it's still healthy and turn it into homes and furniture where the carbon will be sequestered literally for at least a century. And studies show that you're going to make more money when you lumber that way, and you actually make the forest healthier for the ecosystems. And it would really work well in the Amazon, for example. But also it's a great strategy for the rainforests of the Pacific Northwest.
Wow, that sounds like a win-win. Is there a downside? I mean, I'm looking at this going, that sounds fairly reasonable. And the other question along those lines is, how does that mimic nature? Because oftentimes we do see that when we coddle our environment, instead of allowing some, trauma or selective cutting or whatever it may be, we tend to coddle ourselves into another environmental problem. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that. I think we've made a big mistake on our national parks by not allowing lumbering companies to come in. And if you visited some of our national parks, you notice in some cases 1/3 of the trees are dead. And it's because the bark beetles have gotten in. And if we had just thinned out the forests, the bark beetles wouldn't be able to get a hold. And people love to look at healthy forests. Tourists don't like to look at forests where 1/3 of the trees are dead. And it's bad for the animals, so you don't get as many animals.
Can I just intervene there? That what we're being told, though, is that 1/3 of our forest is dead because of global warming, because of emissions, but there really is more to the story. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be environmentally conscious and that, it's not good to eat organic, to have less emissions, to, lessen your carbon footprint. All of those things are good things, but it's not the full story.
It's not the full story. And I think our government is waking up to the fact that there's a reason why our national forests are not looking as healthy as they should. And it's because we banned lumbering. And when you do that, you get a lot of tree growth. There's not enough water to sustain it. And when the trees are short of water, the bark beetles come in and kill the trees. So we'd be wise to keep the forest culled sufficiently that the bark beetles don't get a hold. And that would make the trees a better ecosystem for the animals that live there. It would certainly look a lot prettier for the tourists. And I would argue, yes, you do want to lumber at a time when the tourists aren't coming through. So you'll pick a month, say in the wintertime, when the tourist traffic is low and when the animals are hibernating, and do your selective cutting then.
That sounds like we're part of the solution and part of the environment instead of this mindset that we are just this nasty, cancerous growth on the planet. We really are more in line with a biblical worldview that we are in charge of the earth, that we are caretakers of the earth, and we can lovingly care, nurture, and be part of the solution. In our final few minutes together, I did want to talk more about some other promising ideas that have been talked about, just aren't being bantered around in mainstream media. Localized farming, the use of our deserts, and other things that you mentioned in weathering climate change.
Well, for example, we can greatly shrink the deserts of the world. I think we need to look around and say, okay, where have we humans made things worse? And one of the more dramatic examples is we've made the Sahara Desert 10 times bigger than when God gave it to us. The Gobi Desert's 4 times bigger. And the reason why it's bigger is we humans have stripped the edge of the desert of vegetation for cooking fuel. So one radical idea I put in Weathering Climate Change, let's go to the sub-Saharan peoples and give them all the kerosene they want, burn as much as they want, so they're not using it for heating their homes or cooking fuel, on the condition they work with us to replant the Sahara Desert, shrink it back to the size it was during the days of the Roman Empire, replant the Sahara Desert with food crops. Now you've got an income for all those Saharan peoples, and you're going to pull huge amounts of greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere, and the ecosystem is going to recover. The animals are going to come back.
That's really astounding when you think of what we could be doing to work together to do something great. But we also try to work together with things like the Paris Accord. What are your thoughts on the Paris Accord, Dr. Hugh?
Well, the Paris Accord people are right that the planet is warming and warming at a fairly rapid rate, and that something needs to be done. And they're basically asking the nations of the world to cut their greenhouse gas emissions. And you know what's impressive? Probably the nation that's done the best at that, which wasn't even part of the Paris Accord, is the United States of America. We've considerably reduced our carbon footprint basically by finding more efficient ways to use that carbon. You know, the fact that we're able to frack oil out of Texas, for example, means we don't have to import it from the Middle East. And when you import oil from the Middle East, you burn a lot of that oil to get the oil here.
Well, not
so
just that, but we also have no environmental oversight in the Middle East. Here we have eagle eyes of people who care about the environment, watching like a hawk every day. There, it doesn't matter. They don't care, and they can do whatever they want.
Well, for example, you have people saying we need to ban the burning of fossil fuels as quickly as possible. They're not looking at unintended consequences. A far wiser approach is let's use the fossil fuels we have now to work towards a future where we're not dependent on those fossil fuels.
Right.
And so basically set a goal. We're going to reduce our fossil fuel emissions while we develop more other solutions, like thorium, for example. It's going to take a decade to get the thorium up and running. And if we can supply our energy needs more efficiently than what we're doing right now, while we build up the infrastructure for thorium nuclear reaction, that would actually hasten the correction of global warming faster than simply going out and saying we're going to ban uh, coal and oil and natural gas, and we're going to just carpet our land with these solar reflectors. And it's like, okay, we could do that, but if the solar energy is not cost effective, how are we going to sustain that? And if we can find a way to use our fossil fuel consumption as a way to move forward quickly with the alternatives, that's the way to go, in my opinion. And the U.S. leads the world in transferring away from coal and oil to natural gas, which is actually a very efficient way to reduce your carbon footprint. And, I live in California, and they're trying to make all of us drive electric cars, but we get our electricity from burning fossil fuels. We need to find a way to get that electricity from non-fossil fuel sources, and I don't see a way of doing that quickly with the present policies we're initiating.
I wanted to get to the God story as we wrap up our time together with Dr. Hugh Ross. And you had mentioned that there is an extraordinary story attached to even climate change, which shows that the world has been primed for man to thrive, for, as you said, the gospel to be spread. But something else we can see not only through climate change, but through the study of our planet, is it does seem that the planet, the climate, the whole kit and caboodle may come with an expiration date. And that seems very harsh. But I wanted to talk about not just the harsh reality, the possible inevitability, but the hope in that story as well.
Yes. I mean, what I write in Weathering Climate Change is we can forestall the onset of the next ice age, maybe by another 14 or 1500 years, but not more than that. If we mess things up, we may see the ice age coming in 100 years. The paradox I put in the book is, we look at the ice age cycle, global warming has always brought on global cooling. If we warm the planet by another couple of degrees centigrade, we will melt the winter polar ice cap. And when we do that, you get huge amounts of snow that will fall on Siberia and Canada, and that will bring on the next ice age. And we see that in the past 40 cycles of the ice age, global warming always brings on global cooling. However, if we can forestall the melting of the winter polar ice cap, we can sustain climate stability, I think, for another 14 or 1500 years. And Michelle, I don't know about you, but I'm premillennial, which means I believe that Christ is going to rule here on planet Earth for 1,000 years. So I'm looking forward to extending things for at least another 1,000 years so that millennial reign will work in my theological system. And there are ways to make that happen. And the good news is, once Christ is here, 1,000 years after that, we all get to leave this universe and head for a brand new creation. And so, in that sense, we realize God has given us everything we need to fulfill the Great Commission, to send the good news of salvation to Jesus through Jesus Christ to all the people groups in the world. If we had sufficient motivation, that could be done in 10 years. 10 years plus 1,000 years, we're out of this universe and heading for a brand new creation where we never have to worry about thermodynamics, gravity, or electromagnetism.
And there's even more reason through science and even through the Bible to believe just that. But that will have to be a topic for another day as we talk about maybe yet another book that Dr. Hugh Ross has written. In fact, some of my favorite books ever penned come from this man. He has a way, and so do all of the scholars at reasons.org. Their books have a way of taking extraordinary scientific ideas, facts, and making it, helping someone like me to understand, and marrying that with what we see in the Bible. It's just a beautiful harmony of science, God's Word, and a lot of hope. Thank you so much for all that you all do. You can go to reasons.org for more information, and you can find links at MyMichelleLive. Dr. Hugh Ross, thanks for your time today.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Remember, you're kind of part of the show. Your questions, sometimes those questions that they say, oh, great questions, Michelle, some of those come from you. So keep it up. Email us, like this, share this. Look, every single topic that's out there, every issue that you can come across has a deeper story. It has a God story. And that's a story of hope, because wherever you are right now, whatever you're going through, like many of us, you may have discouragement and wonder, what am I doing this for? Why am I here? Well, that's part of the God story. And when you can see it in real time, in real ways, not in just some mythical la la land kind of way, it really is a message of hope. So help us to grow. Like us, share us, pray for us, and make sure you listen. We'll catch you next time. Thanks.
For more fun, go to MyMichelleLive.com.